This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to Body Count, a history podcast where we gab about death and disaster through the ages, highlighting figures, single events, time periods, whatever it may be that resulted in someone, or as is usually the case, a lot of someone's dying. I am your host, Jessica Manor, joined as always by my co-host,
Cara DiDemizio, and we are back with more Gallipoli. We're actually getting to some sad shit today. So, Thomas is back, and
I'm back.
He's about to make Jessica cry. And he
At this
has been
point,
excited.
Listener, you are probably very familiar with who I am and my voice now. You're probably sick of it. Don't worry, there's probably like 3-ish more episodes to go. So, we're in this together now. We're deep in this together. So we're just going to have to ride it out, I feel.
We're going to have to write it out. Our viewers are going to have an Anzac week and a half. It's going to be amazing. They're going to be.
I know, it's going to be like April
depressed.
17th to April 25th at this point. But that's fine. That's good because, quite frankly, I think the world that's not New Zealand and Australia need to be aware of what Anzacs are. And they need to be appreciative of that because I feel like you said, I think 2 episodes ago, Thomas, it's kind of in the historical memory for Australia and New Zealand, similar to D-Day, with the exception being, of course, spoiler alert, that not great advances happen in Gallipoli.
So it's widely seen as New Zealand's kind of greatest military disaster. Just in the not necessarily. I think we may have had some technically worse ones since, but it's kind of the first really big one. So it is like in the national consciousness.
Well, and like you said, I think it kind of premeditated the discussion on like what New Zealand's place was in the, I guess, greater Commonwealth, right? Because up until that point, there was the idea that, okay, tit for tat, we allow, if we support Britain here, maybe they'll support our interests if shit goes to the fan, because at this point they already had an idea in the South Pacific there might be some shit that's going to happen later on, which, spoiler alert, they weren't wrong there. Just the timing of it was a little bit, I think, different than what they thought. But that being said, I think that would have changed, and I think we'll probably discuss this, but in the aftermath, that would have certainly changed course on, I would think, how New Zealand and Australia would have felt.
Yeah, definitely. And it's that kind of stuff that later when America was trying to cozy up with kind of New Zealand and Australia and a few other Pacific nations as well, things like ANZUS, which was like a military pact between Australia, New Zealand, and the United States.
ANZUS? Are you serious?
Yeah, that's what it was called, ANZUS. Yeah. Which was then, I don't know, I don't think it's still around. If it is, we're not part of it anymore, because we banned nuclear stuff, and then the United States got real pissy at us about it, so they kicked us out. But it's that kind of, and as well as when Nixon came to New Zealand when he was president, the idea behind that was to foster increased relations with New Zealand, basically not necessarily to pull New Zealand away from Britain, but to kind of bring them closer to the United States, which would kind of in turn, New Zealand kind of saw it as like a United States, United Kingdom kind of choice, right? We kind of have to pick one to go with. And ultimately we ended up going with the United Kingdom, because there's just a bit more history there that kind of kept us connected to them. But, it was things like Gallipoli that when these events where the United States was trying to, have a better relationship with us, have a more United Kingdom type relationship with New Zealand, that, people were like, yeah, like maybe we should look at Gallipoli. Look how that went. Maybe we should be more friendly with the United States. It's never really gone that way, but the things like Gallipoli are kind of, that's, I guess, what people point to.
Fun
when these
fact,
things happen.
New Zealand is back in the saddle as of 2012 with ANZUS.
So, really?
Yeah. So in the 80s, they're like, like you had mentioned with the whole nuke thing. It had kind of put the New Zealand at odds with U.S. foreign policy. Well, per this info I'm looking at, it looks like in 2012, New Zealand had lifted a ban on U.S. warships, including nuclear warships, visiting. Number two, also, it looks like New Zealand in 2007, from what this is saying, resumed key elements of the ANZUS Treaty. So New Zealand is once again allied in that regard with
Back
the
in it.
United States. Yeah, who knew?
Yeah, so I do, because I remember this event in 2012 quite well, actually. So I do actually believe that we haven't rescinded our ban on anything that is nuclear powered.
But
Because
regular.
correct, so your US warships are allowed within New Zealand waters, but they generally don't, because there's no way that we can guarantee that a US warship is not nuclear powered. This was in a direct response, I believe, to the United States sending a warship to, I think it was the 100th anniversary of the Royal New Zealand Navy, and so the US sent a warship here. I think it was a destroyer to kind of have a presence at those celebrations, and there was a big kind of hullabaloo at the time because a lot of people went, well, hang on, nuclear-powered warships are still illegal in New Zealand. How can we guarantee that warship is not nuclear-powered? And the government basically just said, well, there is sure as shit no way that the US government is letting our people on board to verify that. That's just bad military policy. So we basically just had to take the United States word for it that it was diesel-powered and not nuclear-powered. Yeah. So I was just like, which I was kind of like, yeah, fair enough. I'm not super happy about it, but I get it. I wouldn't want anyone wandering around on my destroyer, looking at stuff as well. The other thing was that I think around about the same time, we also sent a warship to Hawaii for the anniversary, I think it was of Pearl Harbor. I can't quite remember, but we sent a warship over there for something, and that was the first time that it was very interesting at the time because it was the first time that a New Zealand warship would be in port right next to an American warship since we banned nuclear in New Zealand. So it was a kind of a big deal at the time. But yeah, I didn't realize that meant we went back into ANZUS. That's quite interesting.
Wow. I'm very excited about this not thaw in relationships, but foreign policy development.
Meanwhile, I had to talk about all of this at the Pacific War Front last night on a different podcast, and I'm just I don't care. God help me! I had to do this last night. I'm a 20th century slut. What can I say? C-24. Oh.
Should we go back to some Gallipoli then? Should we?
Yes. Let's rewind. And where are we in the story, Thomas? Where have we left off?
Where we left off last time we mostly covered the April 25th landings. So what that kind of entailed and how that kind of went. Long story short, atrociously is in a word. But, go back and listen to that episode if you want the full.
I'm sorry. I just thought of your tweet today about, oh, shit, I remembered all the stuff I said.
Yeah, no, there was an Aussie guy that was like, oh, I really want to listen to this. And then I was just like, me remembering all the stuff I bagged about Aussies. It was just, oh, shit.
Like, why would you land in that cove? Like, why would you do that? That's all we talk about.
Why did you land not exactly where you intended to? And
but
not take into account anything.
Specifically, what I remember about is where the lens that we're looking through, I remember we seem to have landed in a slightly better place in which they actually get some rest. But then Thomas fucking dashed my hopes against a rock horrifically, being like, no, it's gonna get worse. I hope you enjoyed this. It's gonna be a lot worse from here.
So basically what we're saying is Thomas is the person that just caught us and we're a crab, and he's about to literally break our skull open against the rock.
No, I'm not gonna break your skull open. I'm gonna pull each leg one by one and then your claws, and then I'm gonna break your skull open.
He's gonna eat us like a blue crab. In this case, he's going to pull open the layers, pull the legs out, and then eat the main meat. So that's great. Good, great,
exactly.
Wonderful. I'm really excited about this because last time wasn't traumatic at all or anything.
Not at all. No. That was the easy stuff.
That was the antipasti,
Christ.
so to speak. That was the appetizer.
That was that was the appetizer. We haven't even got to the main yet. So we talked about the April 25th landings and how that kind of went for them. And of course, following William Malone, the Lieutenant Colonel of the Wellington Battalion, kind of his kind of journey through that. So of course, we're looking kind of through his lens. And kind of just when we last left off, the Wellington Infantry Battalion had just been reassigned from the Gallipoli Peninsula to go to Cape Helles, which, if you kind of remember a couple of episodes back, that was kind of where the quote-unquote main assault was meant to be happening. The Gallipoli Assault was meant to be like kind of a diversionary measure and was meant to cut supply lines so that the Ottomans wouldn't be able to reinforce Cape Helles and that kind of stuff. But the British commanders thought that Helles was going to be where the bulk of the work was done. That was where they were putting their best men. And Gallipoli was like, well, we need some guys to go and do this like fairly menial task that needs to be done. So we'll put the kind of average guys over there. So the Wellingtons had been pulled off Gallipoli to go to Helles instead.
I'm sorry. FYI, guys, really quickly, we're going to put these maps that Thomas has, and I'm very, very grateful, supplied for us. It's going to be kind of important that you look at these maps. It's going to be a kind of a central thing. It's going to tell you what you need to know. Well, you're going to, you're going to have an idea about where we're moving, what we're doing, what we're up against. They're topographical, and they are also showing the way that incursions move, like as the Allies are coming. It's going to be very important.
Yeah, it's less important for Helles. I don't have any maps for Helles because, if I'm honest, I was less interested because we're going to go there, do some shit, and come back. Spoilers, but that's how we're going to go. So I haven't got any maps for Helles, so it's slightly less important for that. But in terms of Gallipoli, it is very, very important. You would have heard me talk about it last time, which was the kind of topography and that kind of stuff. To understanding that is kind of key to understanding why Gallipoli was so terrible. So we last we left off, we started heading towards Helles. So when they got there, the Wellingtons and other Kiwis were basically set about to try and end the now 2 day long Battle of Carinthia. The objective was to take the village of the same name and a nearby hill that would allow them to have the advantage in the wider area. They'd have oversight over the wider area, all that kind of stuff. The plan was for the French to capture a nearby gully, and the Kiwis would surge out of the trenches to capture the village itself. The Wellingtons, Aucklands, and Canterburys would be on the left, centre, and right, respectively. So the Wellingtons were on the left. And the Otago's would be kept in reserve due to being in bad shape after the offensive on Baby 700, which I believe we briefly mentioned last time. The attack was due to take place at 11 a.m. with Aussie historian John Laffin saying, quote, if Hunter Weston, the commander who came up with this plan, had actually wanted to be beaten, he could hardly have improved on his plans, end quote. So, oh boy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep. This was given to the fact that this would give the Ottomans ample time to wake up, have breakfast, and be ready, among other factors, as that he didn't actually know where the Turks were. So, if you started at 11 o'clock, they're getting up at 6 a.m., they're having their brekkie, you've got time for a chinwag and a bath, and you can go, right, 10:30, right, let's go down to the trenches, lads, and, mount up. By the time 11 o'clock rolls around, the Turks are ready. They're already waiting for you.
They've done calisthenics. They've dressed up for the day. They've done their hair. They're coiffed. They're ready for this shit.
They've got their morning yoga.
Have you ever had Turkish coffee? Seriously, Turkish coffee is legit. So they're already hyped.
So they're going like they're fully ready. Right?
Yeah. Oh, they're not just ready in the sense that like you get up in the morning, like do your hair and go to work. They've
They're
done
like, let's defend our
yoga,
homeland.
they've
They're
meditated in the morning. Like 11 a.m. for a military operation is like, these guys aren't just like ready. They're like mentally, physically, they're like, you know what? I feel good. Like, you know.
Not to mention the advantage that they're defending their homeland, which is an important thing too, because in their mind, when you have the advantage of you're defending your homeland, I'll put it this way, a lot can happen when you are in theory defending your home turf. It's an excellent propaganda
they
machine.
have snorted some nationalist coke off of their coffee table, and they're ready to go.
To be fair to the Ottomans, I think I would feel the same way if I were like, you know what I mean, being invaded. Like,
I mean, it gives you an inherent mental
That's why I said a nationalist sense of you're ready, you've stretched, you're fucking feeling loose. Let's do this. Cleanse.
You know, you're ready to go.
Yeah.
But it is. You're right. It gives you an inherent mental advantage because you are, kind of willing to hold ground for longer than you perhaps would or should if you were just holding a piece of ground that didn't have any meaning to you. So, and the other thing as well being, of course, as I just said, they didn't actually know where they were. The reconnaissance and that kind of stuff was actually pretty trash. So, pretty good all round, So on the 7th of May, Malone was ordered to move his troops forward, avoiding any casualties by moving his men in small groups, as opposed to one just large mass. 2 hours before the attack was due to commence, New Zealand Infantry Brigade commanders were informed that the attack would begin at 10:30 a.m. now, which would take place after 15 minutes of shelling. So Johnston, who, if we remember, is the New Zealand Infantry Brigade commander, didn't pass this on to his battalion commanders, Malone being one of them, until after 10 a.m. After 10 a.m., meaning they had 20 minutes to brief their company commanders, who in turn had barely 10 minutes to brief and deploy their platoons.
Jesus.
Nothing says victory like a rushed assault, right?
Yeah.
God, Jesus Christ. These poor guys, they cannot catch a fucking break.
I mean, didn't have a clear idea of the objectives or what support they could expect from other units. They didn't really know what was going on.
Is there any reason we know why only 15 minutes of shelling? Like, that seems a little lax.
I didn't find anything.
I guess they just thought that was sufficient. Okay. Well, I mean, based on what how this assault's been planned, I'm really not all that surprised thus far.
Yeah. So. It is when you compare it to other, we'll talk a bit more about some more shelling that they did and stuff. Usually they'll say it's like half an hour, 2 hours worth of shelling before they assault, right? It's quite a significant amount of time. So 15 minutes of shelling in kind of the grand scheme of things is not a lot of time compared to other assaults of similar type. Same sort of thing. So it is a bit unusual why they did that, but I'm not sure why they chose that. As you say, I guess they thought it was sufficient. To
call back for our listeners, I think it's going to be just a drawback on. They thought they were largely unprepared for this assault, which should have been proved ridiculous after 4 months, but apparently not. Okay. Wow. Great planning. All right.
Yeah. So some amazing planning, and it didn't end there though. The Wellingtons were still 500 meters, which is about 1,640 feet from the front line trenches by the time the shelling stopped. So they would need to cross open ground, totally exposed, just to reach the start of their own line. I'm not even talking for anyone who doesn't really quite understand what I'm saying here. I'm not talking about they have to cross no man's land, the area between the Turkish and Anzac trenches. I'm talking they have to cross their own trenches in open ground, totally exposed, with no fire. Artillery support, just to get to the point where they reach no man's land.
So
you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that that's fucking ridiculous.
I am now getting what you meant by it's gonna get worse. Oh,
This
shit.
isn't even the
Gonna get
worst
worse.
bit.
I know. Oh,
It's better.
It's horrific. But, this didn't stop them. At 10:30 a.m., they rushed towards the Turkish trenches, cheered on by other troops. After 300 meters, which is like, I'm not quite sure how much that is. I didn't do that conversion, sorry. After 300 meters, they were forced to take cover as machine guns absolutely smashed them. The other battalions...
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's rough. 300 meters is... I mean, it's a decent amount of distance, but it's... in open ground, it is a lot. So the other battalions hadn't had much luck either. And by 1:30 p.m.,
that's
Kiwis
about
were at a
984
standstill.
feet. For any Americans listening, that's about almost 984 feet, so about 1,000 feet away. So they're literally just being basically mass murdered. Like, I mean, machine guns taking them out on all angles.
If
they're
helps
charging
you out
ahead.
at all, guys, think about a hell of a lot of football fields in that space.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of area.
Three football fields, I think.
Yeah. So by about 1:30, as I said, the Kiwis were at a standstill, and the whole thing was shambolic. They had been sent in broad daylight at the enemy with virtually no recon, no clear objective, and minimal support, as well as the fact that the attack starting far behind the front line gave the Turks plenty of time to know what was happening, where they were, and how to counter it. So it was, in short, as I said, shambolic and generally just a fucking shit show. And Hamilton, if we remember, is the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force commander, so he's the top guy. So Hamilton wanted to give it another go at 4:30 p.m., and Malone was ordered to fix bayonets and push on. He protested to... Yep. So he protested to Johnston, which was his direct superior, that his men were already 300 meters ahead of any other unit, and the Aucklands had not been ordered to push forward. So if you remember, the Aucklands were in the centre with the Wellingtons on the left. So they had an exposed flank on their right already. If they pushed forward any more, they're just going to expose that flank more and more, unless the Aucklands push up
Malone
as well.
Sees. Malone, he knows.
Yeah, which he knows. I mean, again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know this. Like, it's not like Malone is like big braining it here. This is something that has been known, for hundreds of years. This, flanks and shit is not a new thing to warfare.
But also, sadly, I have to remark, it does not seem that anybody that is over him in field command seems to see this, whereas he does. So, again,
exactly.
Obvious to us, but again, sadly enough, not obvious to his commanding officers. So
exactly, which is really what it all boils down to. It's 2020 hindsight, here looking into the past. So Malone does know his men would be slaughtered, but Johnston doesn't care. Thankfully, Hamilton ended up ordering a general advance for 5:30 p.m. So that means everyone will move forward. So that's something, at least.
Oh.
The Wellingtons attempted to push, but Turkish fire forced them back into the trenches. And the rest of the NZIB weren't able to move either, with the Aucklands and Otago's in particular sustaining heavy losses.
And
so it's going badly.
I'm just visualizing. Can you imagine, like, when people are getting mowed down around you, and you're carrying 80 plus pounds of like equipment? Another natural obstacle is you're having to, how do I put it? Walk over dead bodies, right?
Yeah.
So, like, that's just a mortifying picture in my head. Like, the best way I can visualize it is, like, picture, like, you and your mates are just, like, a whole line up, and then they're getting freaking mowed. You're in the line before, and then you're having to, like, basically walk over them and seeing, you know what I mean, their bodies, basically. So I can only imagine, like, the stressors, like, the post-traumatic stress, like, I know for me, if I was hearing just the artillery shells, right, that would be enough for me to, like, want to curl up in a ball and just, like, put my, like, hands over my ears. So I can only imagine, like, for these guys that are seeing the people that they've been in training with at this point for many months, if not many years, preparing for this moment, whether they be the Wellingtons or, any of the Australian troops. Like,
yeah,
Jesus.
that's
Christ.
the kind of part of that as well is when you say like dead bodies, I don't want to give the false impression to the listeners that these bodies are nice and clean. They go down and
No, it's
he's a
body
nice perfect
parts.
pose. But it's not just that. It's bodies. Some of those bodies have been there for a while, and so what actually ends up happening is those bodies in the the heat and decomposition and stuff, they actually inflate with gas and they bloat. And what they kind of did for fun is they used to shoot those bodies so that they would explode, and then the guts and stuff would rain over the enemy trenches just because it was funny.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Which is like pretty fucking.
That's horrifying. Hold on, who is doing that? Who is shooting the bodies for fun at this point?
Both sides.
Both sides.
Fuck.
To fuck with each other. Yeah, it's metal as fuck. This is a rough war. This is in a way not.
I mean, I get that they're already dead at this point, but there's something still, I don't know, in my head at least, there's something still disrespectful about it, right? Because like, they're already dead. They're not getting an honorable burial. They're already decomposing. They're already putrid smelling. And then you're just fucking taking out your like, you're just basically going off and making these explode. Like, that's disgusting.
It is what it is. This is why I always tell people we always want to talk about the Second World War, but the First World War is just so much more, because there is a mass mechanization, but there is still a lot of old school like war tactic.
That's the problem with World War I. They're using these old school tactics in a very non-productive way, so they're not
in
updating
a
for
semi-industrialized world. So it's rougher.
It's this weird
way
kind of
rougher.
Yeah, it's this weird kind of mix of new and old stuff, and it's arguably kind of way more grisly in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's metal AF, as our listeners will know. It's metal as fuck, guys. This is what it is.
In a perturbing way.
Yeah, definitely. So the Aussies and French elsewhere on the Cape weren't having much luck either. Unable to move and being mauled, the Aussies suffered 1,000 casualties alone.
And again, casualty in this particular term means, and correct me if I'm wrong, not only just like people killed, but basically you're being put out of battle for whatever reason. So you're injured,
whatever reason. If you disease, or if you get injured, or it's basically anything that you can think of that means that you're unable to fight, you become a casualty. But usually what that means is you either died, was injured, or
such as maimed.
Yeah.
So you're basically rendered.
But think about your injuries and your maiming. If we're in trench warfare, even here in the Eastern Theater, bodies are being shot like for funsies to rain down like horrible shit. What do you think your evac chances are if you're a serious casualty of war?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
These aren't guys that are getting grazed by bullets, right? These are horrific fucking injuries. They're not going to survive, a lot of them.
And they probably know this at this point, right? Because like at this point they're seeing what's happening to the people in front of them. So like that's particularly daunting.
Sad thing is, I'd rather outright fucking die than, I don't know, like
than survive, like, but not be
injuries that happen.
At least it's quick, at least
it's
light switch, right? Like,
done.
1 minute you're there, 1 minute you're not, and it's like, oh, thank God. That's
almost like you can hope for a headshot, right? Like you hope for a headshot in this point.
Even if you take a bullet wound and you sit in that trench for a couple of days and then get sepsis, like I know what end I want, and it's not that.
And with one thing we have talked about in the previous episodes as well is the stretcher bearers were working non-stop, so the kind of medical teams and that kind of stuff were already overstretched, so much. So it's not even just like whether you it's not just like your chances were higher if you made it back. It was, did you make it back at all? Because someone A, found you, B, managed to get you back before they got killed, and C, whether there was anyone who actually managed to make it to you because there were any stretcher bearers left, so it's...
Thomas, you've brought the most metal fucking story I think maybe that we've ever done. Like, it's making
you invited me
already. I did indeed. But it's making me sick already because I just never thought about the casualty side of it until just now, sadly enough.
It's it's something I would have put more on, but again, we had to cut content somewhere.
We gotta cut somewhere.
But, it is important to kind of have that in the back of your mind that, because the other way to think about this, 1,000 casualties, that is roughly an entire battalion. That's basically the Wellingtons wiped off the map. That's it. They're gone. This is not the Wellingtons, I should stress, but, that is effectively what that number means.
Oh, my God.
It's only going to get worse. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, for Malone's part, he had suffered 200 casualties, with the battalion now at half strength with about 500 men. So, it's only been like a week, by the way, since the initial landing.
You're gonna you are
a
gonna
week.
Carve my heart out like 100, 200 men at a time, aren't you?
Yeah, pretty much.
Jesus fucking. Okay, all right.
So, once again, the plan was a failure, and they were forced to dig in. On the 8th of May, Hamilton wrote to Kitchener. If you remember, Kitchener is the Secretary of State for War.
I do.
Yep. So he wrote to Kitchener of the woes of the operation and that the Ottoman defences were just too strong, specifically saying they were, quote-unquote, too scientific. That's not super relevant, but I thought it was an interesting way of putting it.
Well,
considering
how
the Ottomans had the advantage, or that they had estimated the Ottomans?
No, so I read the wider quote that was from. He does not mention that at all. He basically just talks about how the Ottomans were just generally better, but he doesn't talk about how anything to do with like, oh man, we have done a crap job. We haven't really done this right. For pretty obvious reasons, right? He doesn't want to go making himself looking bad. When he can just blame, hey, but the other guys are just so much better,
But for an overwhelming, as we have established, and it's not outside the realm of everything that exists in the British Empire at this point, a racist, at least he's going, oh, fuck, you guys massively underestimated what we're heading into, because not only are they rocking and rolling and ready for us, they're scientific, like down to the nth of what they bring against us. They know what the assault's going to be. They are rocking, rolling, and ready for us. What are you going to do about it? Which, again, we've established, like most people at this time, he's a racist. It's not out of the way for him to be so, but also for him to go, oh, shit, we massively underestimated. Like, they are ready. They are clever. This is good.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I think what has happened is he's had a conflict between his racism and his pride has won out.
Oh my God, you're so right. You're so right. And how
he's basically like, do I bag myself, or do I credit these guys that I think don't really deserve it because I'm a racist? He's gone, which of these is the lesser of two evils? I'll just say that the Ottomans are doing pretty well because I really don't want to make myself look bad.
You're exactly right. No, you're exactly right. Which is just, again, that bizarre place where when you get on this guy's side, you might be against it all of a sudden. But I know that I'm going to be on it by the end of this freaking episode.
Oh, not Hamilton's. No, we're not going to be on Hamilton's side.
Well,
we're still
not Hamilton's, but Malone's specifically. But also Hamilton, like, I'm never going to be on his side. But I also kind of see it should have been taken into account. Like, but again, how do you expect somebody in command, like ultimate command, to read between the lines? And that's kind of the thing.
You can't. Not at this point, in my opinion.
I think I might have been, but again, I have a lens of 100 fucking years and reading between the lines.
That's true. We all do, right? Like, we're all looking at it retroactively.
Exactly. So I don't know. I don't know that I would have, but I feel like somebody with any fucking sense should have.
But remember, I think this is the thing about World War I, right? And this is, it's not that it doesn't happen in other conflicts, but one of the common criticisms of leadership on all fronts is that there's this lack of understanding of what's actually going on, in the sense that you're sending all of these men to their deaths because basically of marginal inches of land. Now, that's particularly the case on the Western Front, right? But when you look at Gallipoli, they're not even gaining. They're not even. No. They're sending these men to literally die upon a hill or a mountain, or a cove, depending on what geographically, formation we want to go to. So they're not.
I know, but like what's interesting to me is, again, like so much human material. We've talked about this in previous episodes. Basically, they view these guys as cannon fodder, but they also expected to take a lot more territory than they would necessarily in the West.
I know, isn't that rich, right? Like, you expect these guys to perform miracles and advantages on
like
very
you look down
unlikely
upon like these colonialist soldiers, but expect them to take more, and then when they don't, you're almost just I don't know, you don't change your game plan upon, okay, this is clearly not going the way that we thought. It's the same game. I just think it's like, what the fuck was everybody thinking?
Yeah, exactly. The interesting thing, though, is that a Daily Telegraph correspondent was on site, and he reported, he reported that the tactics the commanders were using were just awful, lacked thought, and had a lack of consideration for other strategies. In short, the defenses may have been strong, but throwing flesh at the walls wouldn't bring them down. So, at least someone else was seeing what Malone was seeing. So, that's something.
Winston Churchill probably
the kind of
that, being a former
no, we're not talking
himself.
about him.
Okay, sorry, I'm just
we're not talking about him.
God damn it!
Fucking goal that must have been for a war correspondent to throw that in his fucking face.
Take a shot of vodka for that Churchill reference.
You're right. I deserve it. I'm gonna do vodka and shut the fuck up. Like, I deserve it. I'm sorry, but
we're throwing some Russian at you. Drink that liquor. We're going. Going back.
You're right.
There are no more Churchill references here. Churchill was not in Gallipoli. If he was,
not talking about him.
We're not talking about him. You're right. We're specifically, I hate the fucker at this point in my
body
career.
Count thing. Any Churchill reference, I don't care what episode this is. Any Churchill reference, Jessica must immediately take a shot of vodka, which means they're going to be very
FDR, Churchill, and Stalin. I have to take a shot.
The good news is 2 of these people are not in play yet, so.
Yeah.
So, the weird thing about this kind of phrasing that the correspondent used was that Hamilton actually used almost this exact same analogy in his letter to Kitchener, which I thought was interesting because he was so close to realizing the problem. Like, he actually wrote this in his thing, saying, we can't just keep throwing men at the walls, it's not working. Proceeds to continue doing that for the next 4 months.
For fuck's sake.
Do you think it was a failure of command, or it was just a fundamental failure to understand what they were up against?
I think he just didn't have anything else. He just literally just could not think of anything else to do. He got tunnel vision. He stuck to his guns. He knew what he knew, and that's all he did. At never point, I don't think he was capable of looking at the situation and going, this isn't working, we need to try something else. Because he literally didn't know anything else. That's my theory, anyway.
That he had from officer school. That's what he had at the time.
That's what you do. That's how war is done.
Yeah, he's not capable of adapting to a situation. Okay.
At least that's my armchair general theory, so...
Well, I think that's a pretty good one, because I think some people aren't like that. They just draw from that book. You see this, oh, God. So
Yeah.
I can only imagine how fucking horrible this was. Oh.
Yeah. So, in any case, the Wellingtons dug in against heavy shelling without fires, blankets, and in some cases, greatcoats. The stretcher bearers working around the clock.
No. Oh.
The commanders praised their men, saying, quote, "I hope I shall be able to tell the people of New Zealand what grand fellows these soldier men are," end quote, as Turkish bullets cut down trees, shrubs, and the crests of the trenches. Shit's getting for real, if it hadn't already. Malone also wrote, quote, "We sat at the bottom of the trenches and never fired a shot. We couldn't," end quote. Malone himself actually had a few near misses as well. A shrapnel shell bursting in front of him, bullets hitting wood near his head, and another barely missing him when he was talking to the commander of the Otagoes. And because of this, Malone kind of thought he was a little invincible, but he was still careful given the heavy losses in officers. So this is something that's actually going to come up a bit later on, is that he kind of has this weird thing about thinking that he's like kind of can never get hit, which is like kind of weird. All right. So Malone dreaded the order to restart the attack, but it never came on the 8th of May. And instead, he recorded how his battalion had gained 1,200 meters, which is nearly 4,000 feet, under heavy fire and crossed several friendly trenches without stopping, meaning that they had achieved the most of any battalion on the day. So that was pretty good. He put a lot of this as well. He put a lot of this as well as the fewer casualties to their greater discipline. The fact that he had trained them really well was why they were able to achieve this with basically fewer casualties than virtually any other unit in the entire on the entire peninsula, basically. In saying that, Malone wrote that a lot of losses could have been avoided by a night advance followed by a dawn assault. And again, this is something that's going to come up later. Which, funnily enough, was actually Hamilton's original plan. He was originally going to do a night assault and then followed by a dawn, or a night advance, followed by a dawn assault, until Hunter Weston convinced him not to do that. So, there's that as well. Malone was very convinced that the New Zealand officers had nothing to learn from the British ones, and the fact that they had seen active service, whereas the Kiwis hadn't, basically counted for jack shit. He really thought that basically everything that they had done, all their training and everything else, really counted for more than the British who had been out there actually fighting. And he was probably somewhat correct, but
thus far he's not been proven wrong. I'll
exactly.
give him that.
So Johnston was likely one of the focuses of this comment, as he seemed to get annoyed with Malone asking for intel and the fact that Malone wouldn't send his men forward on basically blind faith without reconnaissance. He wrote, quote, "I asked also for barbed wire, engineer detachments, the moving up of so-called supporting troops, and generally everything that can enable me and my men to do their jobs thoroughly." He says, Johnston says, "I am more bother to him than the 3 other COs together. They say yes to everything and seem to blunder along. But I am not seeking popularity, only efficiency." End quote. So
that I'm back on the motherfucker side all over
yeah,
again.
Exactly. Yeah, so he
is a troubling figure.
Yeah,
I do appreciate that. Just how much he cares about his men and
yeah,
he's not wrong.
The Wellingtons were holding on best as they could, but everyone knew that the advance would be impossible without artillery destroying the Turkish machine guns. This hadn't really worked, though, and in fact, Allied shells were being dropped closer to the Kiwi lines than the Turkish ones.
Oh, no.
Oh,
yeah.
It was, they were actually killing their own soldiers.
Not quite. Not at this point. Not at this point they weren't.
Oh, so you mean they will be?
I will neither confirm nor deny that.
Oh, that's worse. Friendly fire.
No.
I will not. I will neither confirm nor deny
friendly
this.
Fire in any world, like in any war, is
Uh,
ultimately a
I'm just gonna
complete
say
failure.
you guys are gonna be really fucking annoyed how the story ends.
You're gonna make me fucking cry. Fuck you. Okay, let's
If this
do
story
this.
doesn't
Let's
end
do
with them
this.
this story in theory should end with them mutinying and sacking every single person involved and putting them into like a jail cell and then like literally disciplining them.
Yeah,
or better yet, military
unfortunately,
style.
it doesn't.
mind.
Should, but it doesn't.
I just
No, Hamilton
glimpse.
ends up being 94 years old and surviving into after World War II. So yes, we know that's not how it ends. But
yeah, I know, and I'm gonna cry. So okay, fine, let's do this. Let's do this.
So they're not dropping. Just to clarify, they aren't dropping shells onto the New Zealand line, but they are dropping them closer than the Turkish line. The artillery guys are not doing their job basically in trying to figure out, or basically trying to angle their shots correctly. So it actually
first fucking day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there
like? Oh, sorry guys. It's my first day on the job. Sorry guys.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to prepare myself.
The important part of this is that this the shelling stopped the advance of the West Coast Battalion because they had British shells exploding right in front of them. That's the key takeaway.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. And as such, Malone made sure to give them a piece of his mind, telling them if they continued like this, they would be forced to shoot back. So he is not fucking around.
And I think if you'll remember from the last episode, his troop are particularly good shots when they've got the old sniper rifle, like lock and load, if you will.
Exactly. So he was particularly pissed at these guys. It seems like it was on another level. It's like, you're just like a dumbass, like because you're an idiot commander, but like, actively shooting at our guys, like that's almost a level above in a way, Yeah. And the main reason for this basically whole problem was poor observation and a lack of communication lines from the artillery guys to the front of the trenches. To fix this, Malone bought his own telephones using regimental funds, knowing that it would save lives. He basically had to go into more or less his own bank account to save his own men's lives, which is ridiculous. He also personally reconned where the Turkish machine guns were, despite risk to sniper fire. He found a bunch of dead Turks, Kiwis, and British too, which he decided would be buried at nightfall after his men had cleaned their trenches of tins, food scraps, and other waste. Again, he was very keen on making sure the trenches and stuff were nice and clean and hygienic and spick and span and all that.
Which again is saving lives.
Yeah, it's important.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
He's such a big. Okay.
So on the 11th of May, Malone was ordered to reinforce another position, but retorted that this would mean he had to pull men off the front line, which is not ideal. He asked why the Otaegos, who were currently in reserve, couldn't do it. He was informed that they and the Aucklands were fucked and out of action for now, and that he was the only fully functioning unit in the brigade. However, after 4 days on the front line, the Wellingtons were finally relieved and sent into reserve. They marched back to the beach in a torrent of rain. Malone and his men found shelter among stacks of boxes and food containers, Malone himself crawling into a small shelter with a random man and cuddled him for warmth. The man putting his blanket around Malone as they fell asleep together.
Okay,
so they
that's
didn't
wholesome.
have fucking bivouac, nothing? They just have to sleep. Oh my god!
But can I just say, Malone is
Jesus!
fucking right.
Oh.
Malone gets justification for sleeping on a mat now, right? Like, for all those years back home, it prepared him for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. The kind of interesting thing about
this
encounter. Sorry, the kind of interesting thing about this encounter is that Malone woke the next morning to find it was, quote, a black man with gold earrings. Fancy my surprise. Didn't I laugh, end quote, which he wrote in a letter to his son. The man, and I'm going to butcher this name, so I do apologize, was Naran Sami, a Madrasi Hindu of the Indian Army. Malone later returned to Sami to get his photo taken with him and gave him a bit of money for the hospitality. So, you know, that was, I think I alluded to that a few episodes ago, but that was kind of this weird kind of thing, like Malone's like kind of a bit racist, but with his like, you know, oh, look, it's a person who's brown, you know, isn't that interesting? So it's like this weird kind of oriental kind of exotic thing.
Yeah, but there's also this weird thing, and I know I'm not saying Maori, right? But like also the stance he took toward that sniper unit that we talked about before.
Yeah.
Like, that's who that was led by. And he's like, all right, fine, we're rocking and rolling. This is war. I don't give a shit what color you are. Suddenly his racism goes the fuck out the window, which I think is interesting. It's like, if you're useful, if you're down to clown and you're doing this with us, suddenly he becomes, I don't know if it's that band of brothers, we this band of brothers kind of attitude, or what it is. Like, it's so weird to me for a guy that is like so staunchly racist as to remark on the Japanese and their cleanliness and orderliness, and then turn around and be like, I want a picture taken with this black man with 2 gold earrings that or like I don't know. I don't get this guy. He's just, he's a mystery to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next night, after not taking any of his clothes off for 18 days, Malone slept in only his shirt and cardigan as they relaxed even just for a moment. He also went to go have a look at a nearby fort occupied by the French, which solidified his idea that his men were the best on the peninsula, saying that the Aussies were here to kill Turks and refused to do the hard work like digging trenches. So,
Did they at least all get to like launder their clothes, or they're just?
I don't know if they did. I would guess no, but I'm not sure.
Because who's gonna do it unless they're gonna do it? And they're just
that'd be a risk, wouldn't it? Would it not? Like an unnecessary risk at that point.
Yeah,
potentially. Yeah. So British and French commanders were now looking at the situation. Was that after 3 days, they were still 1 kilometer or 0.6 miles from Carinthia, which, if you remember, was their objective. And that this objective was actually unlikely. Now, it was a matter of whether they could hold on to their position on the peninsula at all. You know, it was getting that desperate. Malone was by now very critical of the opening stages of the campaign, saying how the shelling of forts by the Navy was a mistake, as it gave the Turks 6 weeks' notice of their intentions and allowed them to act accordingly. His thought was that they should have just rushed in with the army and swept them away. Malone also devised a strategy to break the now stalemate at Gallipoli. First, they would need to establish a strong line at Hellas and garrison it with the worst troops. 3 divisions, 45,000 men, would then move to Anzac Cove at night and attack Hill 971 at dawn, the highest hill on the Sari Bear Range, supported by naval shelling. Once Hill 971 was hit... Sorry, yep.
No, I'm just saying, I mean, that's not a bad fucking idea. Okay.
Doing it at night isn't a bad idea.
Yep.
None of it's a bad idea, actually. So, yeah, let's go on.
So once Hill 971 was captured, they would move on to the Dardanelles coast and cut off Turkish communication, fulfilling the original objective of the Gallipoli campaign. He hoped something was already being thought up in that vein, but it sounds like he sent it to Birdwood so he could consider it. Birdwood, of course, being the leader of the New Zealanders, I believe. Let me check. No, he was the commander of the Anzacs. Was Birdwood?
It's not a bad idea. Really.
I mean, given in theory and in paper, not on paper are two different.
Not on, but fuck, you can't get any worse on actual paper. I mean, it's not a bad goddamn idea when you look at it.
As we will find, although they didn't take up Malone's consideration, this was going to become an actual plan. Spoilers. So on the 16th of May, Malone sent a letter to his wife, Ida, talking about how fit he was, his difficult relationship with Johnston, and how he wouldn't tell him things, and that all Malone wanted to know was that the precautions were being taken.
That wasn't censored, right? Because wartime censorship
Yeah.
is a thing.
I am too, actually. A lot of the things he said. Okay.
Yeah, because I've seen World War I telegrams. Usually there's just like gigantic like bleeps. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, they must have let it through because I mean we know it now. So I guess at some point he was able to get it through. And that's all he wanted to know was that precautions had been taken because often they weren't. He also sent her photos of his tent and makeshift bookshelf, on top of which he placed her photo. He also wrote to a colleague from his territorial days, praising his troops, calling them, quote, heroes all. I'm so proud of them, end quote.
Okay, god damn it, Thomas.
God damn it, Thomas.
We've hit a high point with him, right? Because I think as our listeners at this point know, we've been up, very down, slightly up with certain regards, down, and now we're at a peak where it's like, well, damn it, at least his consistency and his love for his wife is there, and that's wholesome.
And also his men.
Yeah, that's true.
And like,
and it's like him saying he's proud of all of them. Like that makes me really sad because it's like,
oh my
God,
don't,
no. It's like,
don't
okay,
I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. I'm gonna hit this one home. He said he hoped to meet the Taranaki families that had lost sons in Gallipoli and tell them how much respect and affection he had for them.
That's.
He knocked it out of the park.
Considering where he was and how he started out his like fucking career.
And you know, from his self-fulfilling prophecy, there was a distinct chance he wouldn't get that point. So there's like the fact that he really expressed will that he could do that says a lot to me. Like,
and that he
and it tells you his respect for his men.
You, Thomas. Oh god damn. That.
I'm just listeners. You can't see it right now. But Thomas is sitting here pretty chortled, pretty
I'm pretty
not
chuffed
happy.
with myself because it is I don't know, I kind of made this a goal now to make Jessica cry.
Yeah, you have, like, based on where he starts out, if you'll go back, and again, I encourage viewers, if you didn't start it at part 1, you're not going to understand why this is such a moving kind of
up
thing
and down
to
relationship with Malone.
Say.
So seriously, if you're listening and haven't listened to parts 1 through 4, or parts 1 through 3,
go back.
What are you doing?
Go back.
He's very much this band of brothers kind of guy, and I kind of on board with that. Oh shit!
Why isn't there a movie about him yet?
Why isn't there? Netflix, get on this shit. Oh,
because I would argue that he is somebody that's important to examine because we live in an era where we're needing to examine racial prejudice and address it, and he's definitely a person to examine the problems with that through.
He's a very complicated man.
To turn around and say something like that, like, oh shit, yes sir, okay, fuck you, Thomas, fuck you so hard. I hate you.
You're welcome.
Okay,
I'm just telling the story.
Yeah, okay, fine, good. You just like hammered it home. You knew you had a home run on Tears.
Yep. I knew it was there.
Okay,
so at some point after this, the Wellingtons were ordered back to Gallipoli, re-embarking on the 18th of May. But not before Malone had a go at the officers organising the whole thing, who hadn't sorted a place for his men to sleep, he himself finding a quick kip in a lifeboat. The Second Battle of Carinthia had lost the Allies 6,000 men to casualties, which is nearly 30% of the troops involved. The NZIB alone lost over 850 officers and men, either killed, wounded, or missing. Quote, we and the other troops have suffered tremendous losses because our directors failed to quickly appreciate that this is the day of digging and machine guns, and that prepared positions cannot be rushed, end quote. Carinthia destroyed the NZIB as a unit, the Kiwis never forgetting how they were massacred by the Turks. But more importantly, they would never forget who sent them there to that massacre, which is the British.
Yep.
So, once back at Anzac Cove, Malone recovered his mail and read his letters from Ida while bullets whizzed overhead and into the sea. This pleased him for a bit until Johnston summoned him to talk about his lack of obedience. Malone saying he went to, quote, have it out with him, end quote.
Ooh, now I'm mad. Now my tears are stopping. Now I'm mad.
We're getting angry.
Let's do this. I'm fucking angry. Let's do this.
So they obviously had a crack at each other. I don't have the details of what that was, but in the end, Johnston apologized and they seemed to come to some sort of understanding.
Goddamn right he did.
In the time that the NZIB was in Hellas, the remaining Anzacs had repelled a Turkish attack, inflicting 10,000 casualties on the enemy.
Jesus.
So, again, I
God.
talked about this before, but as bad as the numbers are on the Allied side, they are substantially worse on the Ottoman side. It is important to remember
last
that.
episode we dropped 14K. Now we've dropped 10K. Oh my God, you're right.
And
This
remember,
is
the
so
Ottomans win
nasty.
this. They win this battle.
Yeah, I know, but at what cost? Like, oh,
No
Yeah.
joke at what cost.
In fairness, they were helped by the fact that the British commanders were not very good at their job. But, you know, winning a battle whilst also having more casualties than the enemy is an achievement.
yeah. You're right. Oh shit,
Yeah.
I didn't even think about it in terms of that. Like, that's rocking. Again, if we could have pulled that, again, go back to our last, if you could pull that fourth wall curtain back and be like, hey, I'm here. It's going to be important later on. Shit.
Yeah. Really. So the kind of funny thing about this is that the NZIB was a bit pissed that the New Zealand Mounted Brigade, who had been left behind in Gallipoli, got to have the glory while they were basically destroyed in Hellas. So they would have preferred to actually been, you know, doing something worthwhile. Malone was shocked to learn that Godley planned a counterattack with 100 mounted rifles with no support. Malone saying that it was, quote, a mad, fatal thing, end quote. This comment may have been partially influenced by the fact that one of the men selected for this attack was Malone's son, Terry, who did survive.
Oh, no. Oh,
He did survive this
okay.
attack, yes.
Okay.
So he's fine. Yeah.
Wait, he only said
We're
this
well past the days
Thomas only
of
said this
cavalry.
attack, Jessica.
Okay.
I
We're-
said he
we're
did,
just-
he did survive this attack. Yes,
This
you're right.
attack, I
God damn
am
it,
noting
Thomas.
that. I just also want our listeners to know that cavalry in these kind of attacks that are being ordered was like dead in the Boer War days. So imagine how ridiculous it is in this fucking war and these fucking days. Like, ridiculous. Such an outdated approach. Okay.
So an inspection of the Aussie front line on the 22nd of May convinced Malone that the Aussies were a bit shit and that they didn't have a hope in succeeding in their current position unless they followed the plan that he'd already come up with in Hellas. So he was quite thoroughly convinced that his plan was the right one to go with. Birdwood actually personally congratulated Malone for his efforts during the landings and recommended him for the Distinguished Service Order. On this, Malone said, quote, "There must be lots of others who did more. I only did my job," end quote. So, you know, he's a bit humble. That's nice. Good for him.
But it's also kind of a slap in the face because
A little
he did his
bit.
job better. He
Yeah.
did his job better. I have to ask, like, I guess at this point, well, no, I already know the answer. So never mind. You've already told me. I can't get behind. He's the only person that is at all schooled in what modern warfare looks like, but clearly is, like you explained. They have this thing that they read and they study from and go to this officer school, and that is the end of it. It's this gentleman's war fucking ideology when he's the only guy that's like, but
It's,
I read
to
about
say he's the only guy is a
war. Like, you have no idea what you're doing.
To say he's the only guy is a slight lie. There is a couple of people that Malone was quite impressed with.
But
like, he was not of them.
Yeah, no, but as far as that chain of command, and the guys that I know that he's looking up, it's gonna get so much worse. I know it's gonna get so much worse.
So the Wellingtons were now set in reserve, and Malone had a little bivouac that he built himself with a New Zealand flag over the door to keep the sun out, and biscuit tins stacked into an armchair with a shrapnel shell turned into a flower pot, which is like kind of weird.
That is a little.
He's so metal. Oh my god! The more I come around on this guy, I tell y'all.
So at this point, high point.
Yeah, the flower pot. Yeah,
the flower pot. That gets me though, because it's like that shows he has some sort of weird, like future Etsy artist energy, right?
Yeah, it's true.
It's like that single ray of brightness, which is weird because we know what he does with his wife and the flowers, and then oh my god, this is gonna get so
it's like
bad.
putting that together.
Okay.
You're emotionally murdering Jessica right now, and you're very pleased.
Yeah, you are. And your smile is horrific. Okay, so let's go on.
So at this point, the cove was filled with Anzacs surrounded by a ring of Turkish positions. Not good. Hillsides were lined with dugouts and bivvies where thousands of men ate, washed, and slept. Water rations were 2.27 litres a day, which I'm not quite sure what that's. It's not a lot, basically. This included drinking, washing, and shaving. Meals were of hard biscuits, bully beef, bacon, cheese, jam, dried potatoes, tea, and sugar. So it's like, it's okay, I guess. It's not super good.
You can survive, but it's not pleasurable.
Yeah. The containers for these items littered no man's land along with rifles, ammo. So the other thing I was gonna say, I took a picture of one of the big statues at the Te Papa exhibit, and it shows this man eating from a tin that had flies on it and that kind of stuff. Because the other thing, of course, is it's extremely hot. There's flies everywhere. The biscuits are extremely hard. They'll break your teeth. It's quite a horrible time.
So you're having to use your 3 liters to round up of water a day. Oh my god!
Plus the other interesting thing about these cans of beef and whatever else that they had, the kind of interesting thing about them is that the grenades, the proper grenades, were being sent to the Western Front. They didn't have enough grenades to send to Gallipoli as well. So what the Kiwis, or what the Anzacs did, was they had the wicks with the glycerin detonator in it. So they would put screws and nails and bits of metal and whatever else they could find into these cans with a wick with the detonator in it, and basically seal it up, light it up, and then throw it, and that was a grenade.
So they Ted Kaczynski their way into the nearby trip. Oh,
yeah.
Lucky. Oh.
It just adds an extra layer of terrible to the whole thing.
I thought fixed bayonets was horrific, but now you have added a whole new layer of, oh my god, Thomas.
Yeah. So, of course, the rank and file men thought that this was generally a bit stink. But Malone, for his part, was actually fine and said things were delightful, though he was concerned about the lack of hygiene and the possibility of disease. He actually requested timber to make proper latrines, but he was told there was none. Thankfully, neither he or his men now noticed the constant whizzing of bullets and shells. They had just gotten used to it by this point.
Can we all just talk about the point that he's still thinking about latrines and shitting habits?
Yep. He's still thinking about where people are taking a dump.
Which, again, given the terrain, right? That's point, not a bad
at this point, concern. Not out of context.
Yeah. So it kind of makes sense. Yeah. It is an important part of camp organization. So it was at this time that Malone learned that one of his brothers had died near Auckland back in New Zealand.
Oh,
no.
Yeah. So he regretted not helping him more as he had fallen on hard times. Instead, he vowed to help his two kids. Yeah, it's pretty rough, considering Malone was actually quite a rich man as well. Instead, he vowed to help his two kids when he came home and offered his widow a small weekly allowance to help her.
Oh my God, that gets to me. Like, it's almost like when that rich guy becomes self-aware that he could have done more. Like, it sounds like a biblical parable type shit, right? Like,
yeah,
he realized he should have taken care of somebody and then retroactively tries to. So there's some sort of, I don't know, character development going on with Malone here. Like,
yeah,
he's
definitely.
becoming acutely aware of.
He's kind of learning from his mistakes, I guess.
Guy.
If you want to put it that way.
God damn this guy. Okay.
Yeah.
No.
So on the 24th. Yeah, on the 24th of May, a 9-hour armistice was agreed to between both sides to allow them to bury their dead. The Wellingtons helped with this, finding hundreds of dead Turks ahead of the position that they and Braun's Aussies had held on the 27th of April, if you remember to the last episode. Malone was pleased to see the work done, as he felt it was a desecration of the body to leave it unburied for so long, remembering that he's quite a staunch Catholic. The atmosphere was tense as each side went about their business, but overall everyone was well behaved. And they ended up, the soldiers ended up trading things like chocolate and smokes and, that kind of stuff as they kind of got a bit more, realized no one was going to do anything too dodgy. The thing with that is, though, that didn't stop each side taking a quick survey of the enemy positions. It was noted that the Turkish officers were generally pretty nice, but the Germans that were on site were kind of dicks. Later that night, Malone wrote to Ida about the flowers on the hills, probably to distract himself.
Why? Why, Thomas? I swear to God, you sat down and wrote this. Let's talk out what's going to make Jessica fucking emotional about this shit.
Yeah,
I know this person that was prepared for war so much is trying to distract himself from the horrors of it.
Just by doing that and looking at the horror of, because I want everybody to fully realize how horrific burying these bodies must have been, because like you said, sometimes you shoot these blooded bodies to rain down on enemy soldiers. It must have been so disgusting. It must have been so horrific.
Yeah.
Oh,
some of them you recognize them. Some of them are destroyed to the point where they are unrecognizable sometimes as people. Some of them have decayed. It's awful. It's just generally just horrible.
It's all horrors. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Fuck.
So 2 days later, on the 25th of May, the Triumph, which is a battleship, was torpedoed, and 2 days later, the Majestic was sunk to Turkish cheers, resulting in the rest of the fleet being pulled back and the water being left undefended. The blow was mental too, though, with the Navy's commanding and comforting presence being missed. Around this time, Terry, Malone's son, was injured by a few bullets in his leg and one in the arm. Malone got time off to see him, and he was in high spirits, which was good. Again, around this time, Wellington Battalion soldiers who had been injured were arriving in England, and Malone wrote to Ida asking her to visit them and tell them that they had done their country proud and that their comrades had survived 2 more offensives in good condition. He also reassured her that he was fine and not to worry about him. And so, on June 1st, the NZIB was handed control of Courtney's and Quinn's posts from the 4th Australian Brigade. When Malone first saw Courtney's, he said it was, quote-unquote, very higgledy-piggledy, which I thought was great.
That's a nice sort of... Okay.
Yeah. Malone quickly put his men to work remodeling the post, building terraces for cover and living quarters for men who were not on the line. Latrines were built properly for minimal fires as well as rubbish pits. So he's back on his taking a shit.
He's back on his taking a shit cleanliness thing.
Yeah.
But also, at this point, it's no longer funny. It's necessary. Damn it. Here we are, full circle.
Yeah. Extra equipment was brought in, and Malone's counter-sniper team sent up to do some damage. Now equipped with special rifles and telescopic sights, the Turkish snipers were silenced in 2 days, and within a week, the entire Monash Gully, which the post overlooked, was much safer. So if you go back to that that map that I had that I showed you last time, there is basically a valley that Courtney's and Quinn's posts overlooked, and that's what they were trying to protect. On the 5th of June, the Wellingtons gave covering fire to a night attack being conducted from nearby Quinn's Post and Pope's Hill. The Turks replied with their usual fire and shelling, the terraces that Malone's men had built, protecting them, resulting in no casualties. Malone was unimpressed with the poor planning of the attack and didn't think it was worth it. He made it clear in his diary that he needed better assurances that the cost in lives didn't outweigh the gains before he would be comfortable committing men to an assault. Malone was also concerned at the condition of his officer ranks as they were dropping like flies. They were being killed at quite a rapid rate at this point as well. On June the 9th, the Wellingtons were given control of Quinn's Post, called Bomber Surt or Bomber Ridge to the Ottomans, along with the Otargos. This was the most dangerous and insecure post on the Anzac line, and also just so happened to be the most critical. You see, Quinn's Post overlooked the entire Monash Valley, where the Anzac troops and supply lines were. If Quinn's fell, it would mean the Turks would have an unobstructed view to shell and fire on the Anzac supply lines and soldiers, potentially breaking the entire front line. It is, really, really important. When Malone took command, Quinn's was a rat hole of trenches and tunnels holding onto the side of Second Ridge. Part of it had been blown up by a Turkish mine, part of it abandoned due to Turkish bombs, and the post was overlooked from both north and south by Turkish positions, called the Chessboard on Baby 700 and Johnston's Jolly to the south. Now, I do want to take a brief pause, because I get that probably a lot of people in the audience are going, why do all these things and all these hills have really silly names? Guess what? I looked it up. So I do have that.
Yes! Excellent.
So let's take a brief pause, because it is kind of funny how some of them got their name. So one that you've probably heard a few times now is Baby 700. It was named after its supposed height above sea level. This is actually incorrect. It's not 700 feet above sea level. It's 590 feet above sea level for some reason. Someone got it wrong.
Yeah, okay. I would think so.
Yeah. So Hill 971 is another one that we've heard a few times. That's also named for its height. It's just 971 feet above sea level. We've heard of Quinn's, Courtney's, and Steele's posts. They're just named after various people for various things. Some of them started that post and that kind of stuff. So not terribly interesting. The Chessboard was one that caught my eye. It's a crisscross of Turkish trenches that overlooks Quinn's Post. So it looked kind of like a chessboard, which is kind of interesting.
Makes sense.
Johnston's Jolly was the other one, which was opposite Johnston's artillery position, which would be used to quote-unquote jolly up the Turks. So it was named Johnston's Jolly. It's like quite a morbid name.
Yeah.
Others that we haven't heard yet, but we are going to hear, is Battleship Hill, which was originally called Big 700, but was renamed because it received heavy naval shelling. And another one that we'll hear as well is Lone Pine, which all the trees had been removed for Turkish trenches except just one pine tree.
All right. Makes sense.
So, yeah, I thought some people might find that interesting. So,
well, I find it interesting because it's so bizarre when you're talking about all these names that and you're going, why? But it's it's a testament to how long they've been there when it was supposed to be 3 fucking days. That's a testament to how long they've been there. They've named things. They know landmarks. They know by sight what they're dealing with. So let that marinate for a minute. 3 days to months and months and months where they're naming something Lone Pine.
Yeah.
God help us.
So the moral of the story is Quinn's post was frankly a bit of a dump. Not something that you want to be said about the post that was most critical to the Anzac defense. However, Malone was about to make it his bitch.
Of course he is. I'm telling you, you're just like, I don't want to be on his side in a lot of things, but I'm just going, man. Woo! I'm on his side. What a war man he is. All this bullshit.
Yeah. So
I can only imagine what he's going to do.
Oh yeah, he is gonna really just he's gonna bring that thing into line. The Aussies had held the post since the initial 25th of April landings until it was handed over to the NZIB, and the Kiwis would hold on to it for another 2 months until July. And during that time, the Turks hammered it, attacking it repeatedly as they also knew how vital the position was. As such, the men were always on alert in case of attack, which was likely exhausting. Malone sent in his second-in-command to check it out before they took control, and he found it was basically a fucking mess, with the stench of corpses that had been lying in the trenches since the 25th of April.
Oh, God. Yeah.
So, over a month at this point.
Jesus.
Malone noted that the Aucklands and Canterburys who controlled Quins before him looked relieved they no longer had to be there. However, Malone blamed the Aussies for the state that the post was in, saying that they should have pushed to give them a better position instead of clinging to the cliff and allowing the Turks to come to them, in some cases within 5 meters, which is a very short distance.
Oh, so he wants to be able to pop his head out and bayonet the fuck out of somebody who feels like it that day. Okay. Well, that seems pretty rock and roll and metal for his character. So,
to kind of give you an idea of what kind of Quinn's post would become, I'm going to send you guys some pictures of a model from the Gallipoli exhibit in Te Papa. Just kind of give you an idea of what this actually looked like, clinging to a hill with trenches and terraces and all that sort of stuff.
I'm really glad you've got all of this, because I just don't think people are going to understand what a different, it's not like the Western Front. You don't have a bunch of plowed fields and hedgerows that you're, this is terrain, legit terrain.
Yeah, literally like trying to hold on to the edge of a cliff is basically what they're trying to do.
And digging the fuck into something like this is just, it's such a, it's beyond imagining what we have now. Like, you're digging trenches into the side of a cliff face, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. So that's kind of what it looks like. And Malone set to work getting Quinn's post up to scratch in the same way that he had done with Courtney's. He had the ground behind the post terraced and covered over to protect from shelling and bombing. Machine guns were mounted to cover Turkish trenches, parapets were repaired, and the trenches deepened. Bodies were covered in petrol and burned to prevent disease. Wire netting screens were made to catch bombs and throw them back. And the part of the front line that had been abandoned was slowly recovered. So
I want everybody to think about that. He's built a fucking fortress into... Yep. Think about that. Like, he has literal parapet. Like, he has built a fortress of defense by hand, limited supplies. It's clean, it's orderly. Like, he is rocking and ready to go. He built, like, I don't know, for you Lord of the Rings fans, he just built Helm's Deep in like a couple of days into the side of something. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's efficiency.
So to kind of give you, because I've mentioned machine guns again, I've now sent you a picture of 2 different types of machine guns. This is also from the Gallipoli exhibit. This is not super related to what we're immediately talking about now, but I thought it's interesting and to bring it up now. These 2 machine guns, the one on the first one that I sent you, I should stress both of these machine guns are actual machine guns from the Gallipoli campaign. The first one I sent you is one that was used by the Canterbury Mounted Rifles. The damage you can actually see on the Ottoman machine gun was inflicted, I think, by this machine gun, by the Anzac machine gun, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just a couple of machine guns and what they used to look like, basically. So that's kind of cool. Right. Yeah. So Malone also encouraged his usual hygiene, telling his men to shave daily, clean their boots, and wash in at least a pint of water. He also encouraged them to keep calm despite the constant noise of shelling and guns around them, and to keep everything as near normal as possible. No half-assing things just because they were at war in a shitty situation. So that was also probably a pretty good thing as well.
Wow. Easier said than done.
Well, yes.
Easier said than done, but it also does a lot for your mental outlook and mental health, right? Like,
yeah,
if you could cling to making something as normal as possible, what we've talked about over and over and over in these disciplinary, like, action settings, at least you could focus on what you know you're supposed to do versus what's fucking going on around you, which is just, again, that sound all the time of bullets and all artillery. Oh my god!
I mean, that's just good advice, like, in general. Is you hear that a lot, just for like mental health advice in general. If you're going through like a really stressy time, a really rough time, you should try and keep things as near normal as possible. Still try and clean your house. Still try to go to the supermarket in the same way that you normally do. You hear that now with, like, you know, at least in New Zealand, when the pandemic was kind of started up, it was like, keep doing what you normally do as much as you can normally do it, because you'll find that your mental health is better just in general. And, you know, there's not really any reason why that wouldn't apply to a combat scenario, really.
I feel so horrible for having to go with this guy as hard as I did for first 2 episodes, right? Like, he's sleeping on it, but he was truly prepared for something.
It has prepared him for it, yeah. He also insisted
he's prepared,
that
and he prepared them 110%.
Absolutely. So he also insisted that his officers plan for every possible scenario, wanting to ask themselves, if this happens, what will I do? Malone was also a bit sneaky too, though. If he didn't get the resources he needed, which was often, he got it by other means. In the case of the wire netting and timber for the bomb screens, he chatted to a naval officer and he stacked the items slightly apart from the main drop so that Malone's 40-man party that he sent to the beach could easily pick up and grab them and bring them back. He did this again a week later with some iron for building bomb-proof shelters. So
again, freaking fair considering the positions he's holding.
Yeah,
he should have already been allotted these things. So you know what? I'm on board.
Yeah.
Do it.
So this meant that the garrison at Quinns had a lot more resources that no other unit could get. And after a week, Malone was certain that Quinns was now the safest post on the Anzac line. I just want to double check. No, I don't have a picture of that. Because I haven't shared with you guys a picture of Malone himself. Really.
No, not yet.
But there is a fairly famous picture. Here it is.
I'm really grateful we're going to have the website up before this so that we can at least have a place where people can go to see these maps and this sort of stuff, because it's very important.
I'm just gonna send you the article. But the picture in the article is Malone in front of his dugout or his bivvy at Quinn's Post.
Okay.
Which we'll talk about his dugout in a minute.
I'm kind of on board in the way that, again, you don't want anybody to be, you always want your men to be better supplied, but considering how important this outpost this position is, I think he's right to do what he's doing. I don't disagree with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So he says it was the most secure post. That was, pretty true, because they had also established complete firing superiority, outshooting and outbombing the Turks.
Spoiler alerts.
Don't read the spoilers.
Don't read it.
Just look at the picture.
Okay, I'm looking at the picture. He looks really proud in that picture, by the way.
Yeah. So they had established firing superiority, outshooting and outbombing the Turks, which had been one of Malone's major goals. In fact, an Ottoman deserter was said to have told them that the fighting opposite Quinn's was so hazardous that they had been forced to call for volunteers to take their positions and to promote each of them to corporal. The thing Malone was most proud of, though, was the quote-unquote ridiculously small casualties, especially after having to do so much work at Courtney's and then do the same at Quinn's and then be all over the Turks to the point where they had the advantage. So it was a rare instance of their, the Anzacs actually kind of not quite winning, but, at least having a bit of an upper hand over the Turks. And in terms of Malone's own dugout, he had 2 sheets over it as a roof, and the whole thing was lined with pictures of Ida and a small area outside where he held conferences and reprimanded troops. He also talked of planting roses on the terraces below. Funnily enough, somewhere around this time, some Taranaki troops sent letters home saying Malone had been killed on the 21st of June, which was reported by local papers. This, however, was false. At the time that Quinn's was being reinforced, Anzac diggers were tunneling into the hillside towards the Turkish lines to try and blow up their trenches in an attempt to stop the same being done to them. Which is another kind of deeply horrific part of the Gallipoli campaign, was the kind of mining holes that they were making and trying to block each other up. And you can hear Turks through the walls. And if you guys have ever seen Peaky Blinders, that's the job that they were doing.
Yeah. I was gonna say that is exactly what I was gonna try to paint a picture with. So imagine that.
Yeah, so they have a couple of scenes in Peaky Blinders about what that was kind of like and stuff, and how they've got the PTSD from that. So if you've ever seen Peaky Blinders, that's the thing that I'm talking about, is what they were quite traumatized by. They basically, what they did is they laid charges along the way as the Turks did the same and dug towards them, sometimes even hearing the digging of each other when they got close. This work would continue around the clock and was naturally a very nerve-wracking experience. There was at least 2 occasions where Anzac tunnels met the Turkish ones and fighting ensued. The Kiwis still had the upper hand, though, with them detonating 28 mines in 2 months to the Turks' 4. So they were doing pretty well. Malone worked the miners hard, and they thought he was a quote-unquote damned nuisance, as he was strict about where and how they kept their tools. He even berated one when he tried to wake an officer for his rum ration, asking him how could the officer do his job if he wasn't allowed to sleep. Wow. Despite this, though, he apparently didn't give off the demeanor of a drill sergeant, that he apparently wanted to convey, as he had a quote keen sense of humor, end quote. I'm guessing this perhaps wasn't meant literally, as it was because he would come out with some quote-unquote Irishism that would send the men into fits of laughter, resulting in discipline being lost. It then became a bit of a game to work him up, as they found it funny, quote, he was absolutely delightful when really annoyed, end quote. So, it's something.
Wow, Jessica.
It's sort of that idea. Yeah, that you just want to fuck with people.
Yeah.
It's funny when they get really angry about it, legit.
Yeah. Additionally, despite his abhorrence of bad language back home, he absolutely let rip in Gallipoli, usually to add embellishment when he was giving soldiers shit, whether it was the rank and file or even his superiors.
So he just suddenly transformed himself into George S. Patton, like, for the day? Or
I guess so, yeah.
Okay.
So to
That's
go
bizarre.
back, yeah, it's a bit weird considering he was quite, staunchly religious.
Yeah, who he is. That's interesting.
Yeah. So to go back to the miners, although he worked them hard, he also actually quite fervently defended them. In one instance, a major regularly complained that the mining wasn't going fast enough, and told the men that if they dug tunnels 3 feet high instead of 6 feet, they would save themselves a lot of work. At this, one of the miners handed him his pick and told him, quote, show us how to use a bloody pick in a tunnel 3 feet high or shut up, end quote. The major was naturally pretty pissed about this and ordered the man's arrest. Thankfully for the man, though, Malone was nearby and had heard the altercation, telling the major, quote, get the bloody hell out of this and leave my miners alone, end quote. During dinner that evening, Malone was elected an honorary member of the mining squad and was presented with a badge made of a shell casing and embossed with a pick and shovel. 50 years later, Malone's son Dennis would be told by one of those miners that they considered Malone of one of the most outstanding personalities in the army, adding, quote, and they were not easily impressed, end quote.
So I'm just picturing this really old guy telling his son that, right? Because that's 50 years after the fact.
Yep. Not everything was Jim Dandy, though. Despite Malone being in great health, the men of Quinn's Post were succumbing to disease, with the parades of sick men increasing by the day. This was mostly as a result of heavy workloads, meaning they weren't getting enough rest, as well as poor diet and just the general heat of the whole place as well. During their time at Courtney's and Quinn's, the battalion suffered 482 casualties, 364 of which were from disease. So,
concerns about
how
hygiene.
Prepared he is, that you've got hygiene, you've also got like diet, and that's considering a guy that is obsessed about these things. So imagine Gallipoli without people.
Yeah.
Without focusing on somebody who's obsessed with this. Jesus.
Yeah. Or if you're under basically someone's command who didn't prioritize any of that kind of stuff, it would have been.
Oh, I can't imagine. Like, oh, God.
Yeah.
You're just trying to destroy me.
Oh,
you got one quote and then followed by this. You're trying to fucking destroy me. This is. Oh,
I'm just telling a story.
I know. Oh.
So, due to the great work that he had done reshaping Quinn's, and because Johnston was off sick, Malone expected to receive command of the entire New Zealand Infantry Brigade, which he excitedly wrote about to Ida. This was short-lived, though, as after 2 days he was replaced by a British colonel. This cemented Malone's thought that New Zealand officers were seen as not suitable for high command, no matter how hard they worked. Both Godley and Birdwood said that they were impressed with his handling of Quinn's, but clearly not enough to promote him. Malone's relationship with all his superiors was steadily getting worse due to him not holding back his opinions and his constant requests for equipment. Once again, Malone wrote to Ida at how the rising casualty list had now awoken New Zealand to the real horrors of war. The NZIB had suffered 2,300 casualties from its original number of 4,000, with Malone commenting that the Wellingtons had lost 200 men at Walker's Ridge and 200 at Hellas. And as we have mentioned in the past, Malone had suffered quite a few near misses at this point as well. A bullet passing through his shelter, another grazing his cheek, and his hands were cut up after a shrapnel from a bomb hit some wire catches as he was trying to straighten up the thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
And a month later, he came very close to death, allowing the captain of a nearby destroyer to come to the trenches and toss a bomb at the Turks. It was a shit throw and hit the netting in front of the trench, bouncing it back.
Oh my God.
Thankfully, Malone managed to pull them both down in time so they came out unscathed.
Can you imagine?
Malone,
that's
yeah,
terrible. Like, you're like, okay, buddy, do this. And then literally just softball throws it. And then, well, almost implodes both of them.
Yeah, that is terrifying. And Malone recorded that, quote, he was very apologetic. It was a rotten shot, end quote, which is kind of like...
That is truly an understatement. Like, your friend almost blows you both up, and all he can say is he was apologetic. Well, no shit, he almost blew both of you up. Like,
yeah, which is like kind of weirdly funny. I found like
I know it is comical in that regard. I think it's because it's an understatement, right? Like, because it's like downplaying the fact that they almost immediately got killed there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Malone actually took another naval officer who was Captain Roger Keyes. The only reason I name him is because he would later become Admiral of the Fleet, which is the highest rank in the
spoiler alert.
Who was impressed with Malone and the Wellingtons. He told a British newspaper that Malone, quote, simply loves it, end quote, and that he had been taken down into the miners' shafts who were doing a great job. So at least someone thought they were doing good. That wasn't Malone. So that was cool. On the 30th of June, the Ottomans made a large attack, aiming to push the Anzacs into the sea once again.
So this is about 65 days later, basically.
Yes. Since they
landed on April 25th. So
so it's roughly about 2 months since they've landed. So this attack was repulsed after heavy casualties. 50 Turks managed to get into the Aussie trenches, but were quickly tracked down. In early July, after 6 weeks on the front line, Malone was ordered to take a week's leave. He spent this on the island of Imbros, walking around it, spending time with a local peasant family, and he met with Godley, who ordered him to take another 3 days. He also met the admiral of a nearby fleet, who actually already knew Malone by his reputation. Quote, I've heard of you. You are the man who turned the Turks down at Quinn's Post. You deserve a good rest. End quote.
Oh,
well done. Oh my God. Fuck you, Thomas. Okay. Go on.
By mid-July, there were reports that another big Turkish offensive was soon to happen. Allied commanders understood that the Turkish Council of War was sending another 100,000 troops south to the peninsula to conduct the attack against either Hellas or Gallipoli on the 23rd of
July. No.
In saying that, other reports were coming in that said that although the Turks were, quote, a natural fighter, end quote, they were beholden to their German, quote unquote, taskmasters, and that their heart was not in the struggle unless Istanbul was directly threatened, which is not really true at all.
That's honestly some racism, right? It's like saying, no, it can't possibly be the Ottomans. It has to be Germany pulling the strings.
It's an Always Sunny, like Dennis Reynolds scream pillow right now. Just
The other kind of part of that as well. We'll kind of, once we eventually, probably in a couple more episodes' time, get to the kind of debrief at the end. This whole plan and this whole thing, and as I just mentioned, the struggle they didn't think that they were in the fight unless Istanbul was being directly threatened. The whole plan was predicated on the fact that if Istanbul could be taken, the Ottomans would surrender, that they would bow out of the war. There was zero evidence to suggest that. If their capital was taken, there was zero evidence to suggest that the Ottomans would just roll over and capitulate. So it wasn't even a good plan to begin with, necessarily.
They're fucking land pirates that Khanates that the Russian Empire couldn't take at the height of her power. Like, oh my God, this is insanity.
Yeah.
It's fucking insanity.
So another set of intel claimed that Turkish troops were being pushed to attack Quins by their officers before being promptly abandoned. Many of those facing the Anzacs were just raw recruits, with many others waiting for an Anzac attack so they could just surrender. The house to Ottoman soldiers. Malone prepared his men for this apparently impending attack, but apart from a few short bursts of fire, nothing really happened. Malone wrote that he and his men hoped that they would attack so that they could slaughter the Turks, desperate to see some more action and get a win, basically, because they hadn't been doing very well at this point. At 4 a.m. on the 30th of July, a Turkish mine went off and killed 3 men, wounded 8. Malone blamed his superiors that had they supplied him with the proper materials, he could have built defences that wouldn't have led to the deaths of these men. Malone also went to bat for his men against Johnston when he wanted to get his men rice, dates, and other cheap fruit to eat, other than just the shitty bully beef that they were eating. This was refused, and Malone would later write to Ida that all senior imperial officers should be sacked, so should be fired.
He's not wrong.
He's escalating in rhetoric, though, like at this point, right?
Yeah, he is.
You can gradually see he's getting angrier and angrier, yeah. So in late July, Malone also met with Johnston and his other officers to talk about a report from the War Office. It had been sent to give tactical advice to them after taking learnings from the Western Front in France. It instructed them to make...
I know about this. Okay. It's not Apple Book. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it instructed them to make defensive positions on the reverse slope of a hill to protect from enemy artillery, rather than the forward slope where they would have a clearer range of fire. Malone apparently said that he had always professed this, but this came from a rival officer he butted heads with, so maybe it was meant to be kind of defaming, basically.
Yeah.
In any case, the officers disagreed, saying that hasty lessons learned in another theatre shouldn't be applied to Gallipoli, where the Allies had a superior artillery and the battles were mostly fought with rifle and bayonet. This would also allow the Turks to make a larger push to take them off the high ground. According to the same rival officer, Malone agreed with this assessment. This rival officer, by the way, is Temperley, who is going to come up later, so write that name down. It is actually Johnston's second in command. So, at this point, the Wellington's time at Quins was coming to an end. Malone had much to be proud of. In 3 weeks, his Wellingtons had taken one of the most vulnerable positions on the Anzac line and rebuilt its defences, achieved superiority of fire over the Turks, and turned the post into a fortress. The defence of Quins Post by the Kiwis, and even a little by the Aussies, quote, would stand as one of the most remarkable examples of courage and ingenuity in modern warfare, end quote. This wasn't the end, though. The New Zealand Infantry Brigade had been selected to play a major part in a coming offensive to sweep the Turks away and complete the original objectives of the April landings. The Battle of Sari Bair was about to begin.
No. Oh,
I see that cliffhanger, Thomas.
God. I didn't know this is where you were taking me, you asshole.
So,
And I'm just sitting here like, you didn't expect this?
So the Battle of Saribia, if anyone is wondering, I have been consistently saying throughout these episodes, it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. We're at the worst. This Battle of Saribia is effectively the climax of the Gallipoli campaign. It is one of the bloodiest battles in the entirety of World War One. It is arguably the most brutal battle in all of World War One. You thought the battles we had been talking about now were like rough and horrible and fuck, you ain't seen nothing yet, son. This is gonna get really, really bad.
It's like an 80s song. But baby, you ain't seen nothing yet, literally. No, Kara, I didn't, because I do not study specifics of C-20. I study an overarching ideology and a story of where we go and what we're to, and political ideologies.
One could argue the Gallipoli campaign led to a lot of changes.
Oh, one could argue that if you look into the specifics, but if you look at the overarching international relations yourself, we don't.
I am gonna middle finger you right now. Like,
yeah, no, you should, but I'll also remind you, specifics is not what one looks into when one is looking at international relations and overall 20th century politics. And so, even though I know it's coming, I have to say I don't know that Malone. That's not something I equate specifically what is coming, if you will. I have an overarching idea, and I know nothing about the particulars of what, who, what, when, where, why is there. I just know it is a grand part of a story. And now that I've looked at this through this lens that Thomas has specifically like dropped us into, it's just, oh, I know what's coming, and it just got so fucking horrific. I can't even, I wasn't sure that was where we were going.
How many pages do we make it to, Thomas?
We have now made it to page 21 of 36. So we, 22 of 36. So we have, we started at 15. So we've gone, what's that? 5, 6, 7 pages. So we've done really well. So we're getting there.
But these next few are going to be just
rough.
Yeah, so the next episode is almost probably entirely going to be the Battle of Saribia. Which I think, like, in all seriousness and quite legitimately, we will probably have to put a warning at the front. It is absolutely fucking horrific.
I'll put a... Yeah, we do.
Because it's for me, as a person who likes to think, you know, I'm generally a kind of fairly stoic man. This was genuinely distressing.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that. If that was, again, I take no notice of who, what, when, where, why. British Empire is a British Empire to me. Fuck, if we are going here, holy shit. Yeah, we have to put a disclaimer.
Yeah.
Fuck.
It's gonna be rough, man. Oh my, it's gonna be rough.
Of all, like, oh. I didn't know if that's where we were going. I guessed, maybe. I didn't know. I couldn't assume. Fuck. Okay, yeah. We're going to have to put a disclaimer.
That's okay. We're learning things. we're learning things. We're having fun. Yeah.
Things. I'm not going to lie. Last night I was talking another podcast about the Second World War. And of course, I'm talking about the Pacific Theater, so I've got to go back to 1850. And I talked a lot about New Zealand and Australia in general terms. And fuck me, I did not want to get into this last night. And so it's hilarious that I'm getting into it tonight. Okay, so that's where we are. Woo! It's going to be rough.
Yep.
I'm just now, as much as I have applauded what you have done, I'm now like realizing the full consequence of what you have done.
I have effectively been butting you guys up for this entire 4 episodes now, almost exclusively for this battle and how awful it's going to be.
Like, so what you mean to tell me is on the Ides of March, we're going to be like utterly like
destroyed.
Yep.
Well, that's fitting.
You're gonna wish you got stabbed 26 times.
Yeah. No, you are going to fucking ruin oh my God, Thomas. I didn't. Again, this is not something. I just know it in generalizations, and I just realized what you're going to do to me. Deep into violence
and deep into history, and I just realized we couldn't get through the entire episode without at least saying that we appreciate Thomas going deep into Gallipoli.
I mean, like I've seen in the past before, but it's
we emotionally traumatized you having to research this topic, though. And I kind of feel bad.
I mean, I knew it was going to be bad. I mean, I don't think anyone goes into researching this thinking it's going to be all sunshine and daisies the whole time. But to me, it's important to get the perspective on the kind of the ground effectively. That was kind of what I found, what I really wanted to get across.
Here's my issue, and it's not an issue, and it's very hardcore, parkour, metal on brand, and I appreciate it. I didn't think that you were going to get this in depth.
I go hard.
So I am just like, no, yeah, you go hard. Like you are hard in the paint. Like you are fucking a Dennis Rodman of historical rebounds right now. But you go hard in the paint, and I didn't think we were going to get to this. I thought it was going to be, a semi-metal story, and now I'm realizing all the shit you've brought to this, Thomas, and you are going to take us dark, sir. Like, really, truly.
It's going to get really dark. Maybe not really dark, but it's going to get quite dark.
No, it's going to be quite dark comparatively to anything else, even where I take our listeners. So I'm super excited about it. You officially have the body count medal of metal, actually. Holy shit, this is going to get fucked up.
I win.
Okay.
Can I just say,
you have won.
Jessica, as much as our listeners love World War II, if Thomas wants to come back post-Gallipoli for something that might be like a little more lighthearted, he could always do the tank.
The tank. Nobody died to the tank, though. That's the thing.
Yeah, but it's a tank.
Yeah,
it's
but they also
adjacent by natural.
The First World War.
I know, but the tank was in World War II, so I'm saying the one I have in mind, the one named after the Kiwi Union leader in question that we're all smiling for right now because we need happiness.
I love them so much.
I'm sorry. I'm like not smiling because I've just wrapped my head around where we're going to go in terms of...
I studied Gallipoli a little bit when I was in college because apparently I decided that was where I wanted to end my World War I capstone. And it was not a fun time. I will tell you that. It was not a fun time.
I know that vaguely. And I remember that vaguely. But how specific and where we're going to end it, I did not know we were going to necessarily end up there. The who, what, when, where, why, the main idea of, oh my God, this is going to be brutal, Thomas. Look at you, sir.
Yep.
I would golf clap, master's clap for you right now, actually. Our producers are going to prefer that. Shut. Like, what a fucking yarn you have woven. Woo! I had
Thanks.
to cry in this one, but I know what's going to happen in the next one.
Well,
Ooh.
the
I'm
objective is to make you
fall.
ball.
Oh, I'm going to fall to fucking pieces. Don't make any mistake about it. Like, I'm going to be a mess. Kara's going to be laughing at me. It's going to be a great time. So let's go ahead and wrap up this episode. That being said, Thomas, where do we find and follow you?
Hello. Yes, I can be found on the History of Aotearoa New Zealand podcast, where we talk about Aotearoa New Zealand. It does what it says on the tin. Aotearoa spelt Aotearoa. You can also find me on Twitter, History Aotearoa, or at History Aotearoa. And you can also find me on Instagram, History of Aotearoa New Zealand podcast. I'm also under the same name on Facebook as well. I also have Patreon if you want to give me money for this. So there's that too. You can also look me up, History of Aotearoa New Zealand podcast, if you want to give me money for doing that sort of stuff. But basically, I talk about New Zealand history, much in the same vein as lots of other podcasts, except it's a lot more structured. than this. There's no banter. It's just me talking.
Well, considering it's yourself, I'd be a little concerned if you were somehow having banter with yourself.
Banter with myself, yeah.
Like,
But yeah, that's me.
But I also think that you've seen the depth of what Thomas's storytelling and narrative history abilities are, quite frankly. And very obviously, this is the same thing you're gonna get without me going, oh, what the fuck, or Kara like interjecting intelligently. So it's gonna be something along those same lines. Thomas is very gifted at giving us a narrative and a history narrative. So
follow Thomas on Twitter for your milk takes, for takes on how New Zealand produces milk.
It is fine.
And also,
whatever I was going to say.
Oh, and also his adventures in the bush. We can't understate that either.
Oh, yeah.
I sometimes go in the bush.
He's a hashtag wink, wink, bush ranger, ladies.
But by occupation,
no more important, like, all laughs aside, when I retweet things that are bat news, they're always from Thomas because it was something I've always been interested in like wildlife biology is bats alone, and New Zealand's bats. I don't think you get any more interesting than ground crawling bats. I am fascinated.
Also,
or
Thomas likes to disturb people with the inside of a penguin mouth.
Oh, mess me up deeply.
This is the kind of content you can look forward to.
I realize that, as you put it, they're like they are teeth, but still, it is the most horrifying thing, oh, God, I've ever seen. But what I specifically love is bat news, because I really went on a deep dive on New Zealand's bats, because my kid loves bats. So we got into that, and that's the coolest thing ever, like New Zealand bats.
Yeah, you guys are really upselling my Twitter. I think you're really overstretching. Yesterday I made a tweet saying I wash under my tits. So just want to bring that level down. I just want to let you guys know that that's not that all the time. It's also just shit posting.
To be fair, I wash under mine too. So,
I mean, I'm glad we all three wash under our tits. That is
exactly
a great common.
But I'm just saying, like if you're going in here thinking, yeah, I'm going to follow Thomas because he posts real cool pictures of like trees and animals and posts cool history facts and shit. I mean, yeah, sometimes. There's also sometimes where I just talk about spooning one major political party and then grinding the other political party in a club. Sometimes it's just shit posting.
To be fair, America didn't know that it needed to wash its hands regularly in the face of a pandemic. So I feel like a good under tit scrub is maybe something people should also, apply to their daily life.
Maybe consider it. If you don't wash under your tits, maybe consider doing it.
Consider doing it. We didn't consider hand washing before the pandemic. So you know what? A good under tit scrub is maybe, I think you're really underselling your Twitter content, because obviously if hands weren't on the table, under tit scrubbing wasn't on the table either. So,
It's true.
Each to his own, Thomas.
Guess. Let's move on from my under tit scrubbing on Twitter.
Let's do that. Kara, where do we follow you?
You follow me on Twitter at Kara DiDemizio and Instagram at Kara.DiDemizio. And before Jessica asks, I will also go ahead and plug Time Travel Talks, where you can follow up with the latest conversations, whether it be historical romances, whether it be right now, we're recording this about a month out from probably when we're releasing it, but we've been doing questions pertaining to Women's History Month, which is a month celebrated in the United States, culminating around International Women's Day, which is an international day celebrating with women and everything that they stand for and everything they're fighting for. That being said, we have some pretty exciting stuff that by the time this episode releases, we'll be having some Napoleonic questions on our Twitter feed. So please stay tuned at Time Travel Talks on Twitter and Instagram for more history content. It's a good place for people that may be casually interested. It's a good place for academics to kind of mix and mingle and get to talk to people that are subject matter experts. Or if you have questions on where to find something, it's a good place to ask. And if anyone's interested in the Discord community, feel free and drop me a DM, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that as well. But yes, you're better left to either DM me on Time Travel Talks or Kara DiDemizio on Twitter, as I don't use Instagram as often, although Time Travel Talks does post their questions on Instagram as well. And Jessica, where can we find you, and where can we find and listen to Body Count?
Couple things before we get into where we find Body Count and where we find me. I'm going to ask you guys again. Patreon is a great place to support everybody. As you know, we appreciate money donations as independent podcasters, but if that is not something that you are committed to, it's not within your purview, it's not something you can do, you can go and rate and review us, specifically on Apple.
Yes, and we've had several really nice reviews lately, so I want to quickly shout those out. Yeah, thank you very much to Thank you very much to Hodgepodge History and Alicia from Civics and Coffee. They gave us 2 5-star reviews within the past week, so obviously y'all are listening to our little please rate and review us, so I appreciate that. As well as the ladies from Whining About Herstory had given us a 5-star review back in December. So belated thank you to all those who've rated us, reviewed us. Seriously, it's a great way to support a podcast, and it's a great way for podcasters to be able to know that they are making an impact. So whether you enjoy Thomas's show, whether you enjoy our show, seriously, rate us at 5 stars and review us, or also feel free and share an episode you're listening to, or as Thomas would say, if you listen to this and you learn something from it and it makes you deep dive, tweet at us. It's a great way to engage, and it's a great way for us podcasters to know that we're hitting the mark, so to speak, that we're resonating. So seriously, if you listen and you were really struck by something, hopefully not shrapnel, please tweet Thomas or Body Count and say, hey, I've been listening to this and I thought this was interesting. And especially if you have questions on where Thomas is getting his stuff, he'll be more than happy to share some good sources for that, especially since he is so close geographically to several of the sources he's been using. So
unfortunately, in terms of sources, for some of it is you have to be in New Zealand to access them. So it's not. It's not very helpful.
Sorry, Warren.
Yeah. So for some people that are like, where'd you get your information from? Some of it is actually just inaccessible for people at the moment.
Sorry, doctor.
Yeah.
Right, Jessica.
Oh no, he can requisition this. Trust me.
True. That's true. But that being said, though, seriously, Thomas, thank you again. It's been an immense pleasure. And
has it though?
As soon as I said that, I caught Jessica's dear listener, you did not see Jessica's eyes as I said deep pleasure because clearly that hit a certain tone with her. So, however, I find it quite pleasing.
Hopefully,
Now,
it's been interesting at the very
it's
least.
it's been interesting. Every now and then, it's good to remind the listeners that Jessica is in fact a human being capable of emotion. So, quite frankly, I enjoy these episodes, and we can find Body Count Pod anywhere you're already listening. Clearly, you know how to stream, so continue doing what you're doing. Download us, listen to us, share us. So we're available on all major streaming platforms. We can also find Body Count at Body Count Pod on Twitter and Instagram, as well as Facebook, which Madison and myself are doing the Facebook because Jessica has preferred to keep Zuckerberg out of it, which is fair, all things said. And you can also find Jessica. Where can we find you at, ma'am?
Jessica B. Manor at Twitter and Instagram. It's very easy. That's the only two I've got.
Seriously, though, support us on Patreon or just share, like, and review, and we will be happy campers. But seriously, thanks to everyone that's been listening all the way through and that has been enjoying it. We appreciate it. We appreciate you. And I think that will call it a wrap. So, Thomas, thank you again. And
no worries. Thank you for having me.
But yeah, bye. Thank you.